Hopefully, you guys are okay with my very low production value videos because I just stop and go, you know what, it's been going long enough. Let's stop. It's very much like regular class. Be like, oh no, I guess our time is up. I'll see you tomorrow. So, how do we predict success in a marriage? Okay, so first off, we're going to define what we mean by success, and that is historically, most research has considered longevity the measure of success. So the couple staying married. Now, I think we could argue about that, right? There's a lot of people who stay married but aren't particularly happy or satisfied or faithful to each other or all sorts of other factors, aren't nice to each other. So, longevity, it may not be the best operational definition of success, but that's the one that most researchers have used. All right, so what factors go along with longevity that help to increase the likelihood that a couple will stay married? One factor is the age at which they married. Notice I wrote 20 to 30. That might be younger than you're thinking, especially the 20 end. You might have thought, well, it's got to be 25 minimum, that maybe marrying in your 30s would be. That's our current social narrative that marrying older is better. But the data does not support that. Couples who marry after the age of 30 are running into a risk of being past Erickson's identity developmental stage. Remember how Erickson said that for most of us, we have settled that conflict between identity versus role confusion by the end of our 20s. And I've heard a lot of people say you shouldn't get married until you're really solid on your own identity. That, it's doomed to failure if you don't have a solid identity when you get married. To a certain extent, you need to know yourself. That's for true. That is for true. That is for sure, or that is true. Um, Data supports that claim that if you don't really know who you are, what you like, and how you want your life to be, like in concept, not in practice, but in concept, like what kind, do I want to live in the city or in the country? Do I want to work a full-time job, or do I want to be able to work part-time? Do I want, like what do I want in the big picture? If you don't have that sense of self, you're probably going to run into trouble because as you figure out what you want, you may discover that you have committed to something that doesn't align with what you want. So that's true. But if you have solidly committed to what your life is like, it may be very difficult to incorporate another person into that sense of self. You already have your routines and your likes and your dislikes and the things that you do um, for fun and the things that you do with certain people for fun. And now you have a partner, and where do they fit in? The older a person is when they get married, the more likely they are to have no room left in their own sense of self to incorporate this relationship as part of their identity. And that means that the relationship is never going to be as deep as it could have been if they had part of their identity to be made from that relationship. So 20 to 30 seems to be the sweet spot because you have a little space left. You are not so set in your lifestyle that it would be difficult to incorporate somebody new into your lifestyle. You can't expect your romantic partner just to adapt to your lifestyle. It has to be a compromise. And if you are like completely convinced your life is perfect, I'm just missing a partner, you're going to have trouble incorporating a partner into that perfect lifestyle because it's not the one that they already have. And so they are going to push back. If you want some homework on this topic, there's a show called Married at First Sight where couples, surprisingly enough, get married at first sight. Some experts pair them up and they get married, and then they spend 6 or 8 weeks, depending on what season you watch, trying to determine whether they like love can grow from this match. And earlier, when they first started the show, they tended to pick people who were in their late 20s and would match them up, and they had more success in those earlier seasons. In the more recent seasons, they've been picking young professionals who are over the age of 35, and they have not been having as good of success. And part of that is the couples will say, you know, I have my friends, I have the things that I do. Where does this new person fit in? And that's a difficult adjustment to make at any age. But if you really are solidly settled in your sense of self, so if you want a little homework, it's a streaming thing now, so you can watch it. Watch the old seasons. Um, Couples who have at least one child are more likely to stay married, especially if that child is male. Um, it's not, obviously not a guarantee, and I would like to argue that having children is very stressful, so it may be the catalyst for the breakup of a marriage. But statistically, couples who have at least one child, especially when that child is male, are less likely to divorce. If at least one of the partner's parents are still married, it doesn't have to be both sets, but if at least one is still married, there's like a goal or a role model opportunity where apparently there's more social support for the couple when you have people who have been through it successfully and have been able to negotiate the difficulties, particularly of early marriage, and provide that kind of social support and perspective that might help the young couple to get over these hurdles and difficulties. When the couple engages in positive communication, like we talked about earlier, John Gottman's advice for good communication, including when they argue, you don't want to get mean when you're arguing or tear your partner down. You want to have productive conversations. Remind each other of why you're together by having little inside jokes or self deprecating humor, things like that. That tends to be associated with longer lasting marriages. Now, having said all that, here's a survey that the Pew Research did back in first in 1990. That's the light green bar, and then they replicated it in 2007. I'm thinking they must be probably getting ready to do it again because it's been another, like, this was done 17 years apart, but it feels like it might be time to do it again. I haven't seen it. Um, so what they were asked is, here is a list of things which some people think make for a successful marriage. Please tell me for each one whether you think it is very important, rather important, or not very important. And so the most commonly agreed to in both data sets was being faithful within the marriage. A lot of people say, well, I mean, that's a individual choice or whatever, and so we do have this small percentage that don't think that's an important thing. But it's kind of one of the definitions of marriage is that, to the exclusion of other people. And I think that's why so many people are agreeing that faithfulness is an important factor. Like 93% of people are saying that. It's gotten to be a little less since 1990. So there are more varieties in how people are being married these days. But it's a really common belief that we chose to get married rather than other structures because we have agreed to faithfulness. Having a happy sexual relationship, it comes in number two. And again, we chose to get married because we believed that we were going to have a satisfying sexual relationship with each other. And then we start to see some variability, right? Where we got sharing household chores, having enough income, living in good housing, having shared religious beliefs, having shared tastes and interests, having children. You'll notice that's pretty far down, even though it was like number two on my list as far as when people are actually followed over time. Those who have at least one child are more likely to stay married. But when they're being asked their opinion, they put children farther down. Down here at the very bottom is agreement on politics, and this is one where I would like to see more modern data because over the past 20 years, agreeing on politics has become like a deal breaker even for dating, let alone getting married, let alone staying married. And so I would like to see whether politics has maybe even surpassed shared religious beliefs as far as something that people think is really important. But I haven't seen the data on that. Some of the negative effects, things that are associated with a lower likelihood of a long-term marriage, would be things like, believe it or not, premarital cohabitation, or what some researchers call de facto marriage, or what normal people call living together with your romantic partner without being married to each other. Premarital cohabitation is oftentimes viewed as a test run for marriage, and so a lot of couples will be dating. When they get serious, they say the logical next thing to do is to move in together, and it's become like a natural step in our cultural milieu. Like um, most couples live together for a period of time before they get married. However, if you compare those who live together before marriage to those who don't, you find, and now I want to clarify, I'm only talking about first marriages. If they live together before their first marriage, um, there's actually an increase in the likelihood of divorce. So first off, let me define what I mean by likelihood of divorce. So we've all probably heard the statistic that half of all marriages end in divorce. That statistic is very misleading. It's based on taking the number of marriages that occur in a given year and dividing it by the number of divorces that occur in a given year. So you might have heard it and kind of assumed that they followed people across their marriage to see whether they got divorced or not, but that's not how it's done. So they take all the marriages divided by all the divorces in a given year, and so you end up with about half as many divorces in a given year as there are marriages. Okay, but that doesn't really tell you about the longevity or the probability of anybody staying married. It doesn't make sense to use that number at all. So instead, if you look at the Census Bureau data, where they literally do follow people across their marriages, what they find is that the average couple has a 28% chance of being divorced within 20 years of marriage. So it's not perfect. It doesn't follow them across their lifespan or anything like that, but they use that 20-year census data as the cutoff. And so 28% will divorce in 20 years. And most couples, if you can make it 20 years, tend to stay married. So I think it's a fair cutoff. Not everybody, but it's a pretty fair cutoff. So they followed the same process with couples who cohabitated before they got married, and what they found is they had a 38% chance of divorcing within 20 years. So it's like a 10% increase, or almost a one-third increase in the rate of divorce if they cohabited before their first marriage. So cohabitation actually increases the risk of divorce. Now I want you to flip this. I want to reframe this really quickly just to mention that we're focusing on the likelihood of divorce, and those numbers sound big, right? But if we flip it over and say likelihood of success, that if we have a 28% chance of divorce if we didn't live together beforehand, that means we have a 72% chance of being still married by 20 years, right? If you cohabit before getting married for your first marriage, you have a 62% chance of still being married in 20 years. So that's more than the 50-50 that you probably came in here thinking. So I just want to reassure you on that, that it's not the death knell. Cohabiting doesn't guarantee that you're going to end up divorcing. It just raises the likelihood. Probably because cohabitation doesn't do for us what we think it does for us. We think it gives us a trial run at marriage, but the truth is, people in a cohabitation, research studies have shown us that they don't behave in a cohabitation the way that they're probably going to behave once they get married. On average, the males in a cohabitation are doing more household chores than they tend to do after they're married. And on average, the females within a heterosexual cohabitation are having sex more frequently than they will once they're married. And a lot of that comes from, like, people tend to go from cohabitation to marriage because they are ready to have kids. Once you introduce children, you start to have more of a division of labor because you can't all be doing all the same stuff. We now have this really time pressure thing that squawks at us and yells if we don't meet its needs. So somebody's going to need to take care of the laundry and be responsible for that. And somebody else is going to need to be in charge of, like, mowing the lawn or whatever other things. And division of labor tends to emerge. And so you get that, and then you also get the reduction in general amount of sex going on in the relationship because they've been together longer by now. The longer a couple is together, the less frequently they're having sex. And so that's part of any relationship. And then second off, now that we have other demands like our careers or our children or whatever else is demanding our time, that also contributes. And so some of these things are probably a function of changing life, not a function of getting married. You know what I mean? If that all makes sense. So anyway, premarital cohabitation in your first marriage. If it's your second or subsequent marriage, it actually is a benefit to cohabit before getting married. Speaking of second or subsequent marriage, if you are bringing children to the marriage, it can contribute to a less stable marital union. And I think it's because children are stressful anyway, and then having somebody else's children, and now you're not quite the parent, but sometimes you need to do stuff in the parenting role. It can be very confusing and can lead to a lot of discord between like the biological parent of the child and their marital partner. And this can be and the children, just their mere presence from the beginning of the marriage, like there was no sort of honeymoon, no kid period. This can just contribute to some discord that can be difficult. A lot of people navigate it really well, but I'm just saying the reason why it might be associated with less stable marriages is because it is very stressful. People of African American ethnicity are more likely to get divorced than any other racial group. Here's a study from 2010, and we have the left columns are white respondents, the next one is black respondents, the next one is Asian, and then the final is Hispanic. And then they've broken it down by level of education. So we've got in the light beige would be less than a high school diploma. The next one would be either a high school diploma or a GED. The dark tan would be some college, and then the bright blue would be they've got a college degree. And so you can kind of see some variability based on level of education, that's for sure. But if you look at the um, overall, the bars for the black respondents, the rates of divorce are higher than any other racial group. Asians are lower than any other racial group. You've got to look at like cultural factors to explain this because this is all within the US. But within the subcultures of the different racial groups, there must be different attitudes about the value of marriage and the reasonableness of divorce and the ability to support yourself on your own and other factors that go into the decision making process when someone's considering divorce. So this difference between racial groups has to be like subcultural. Something's got to be going on. All right. It might have felt as I kind of went through motivations and then work and then marriage that like this is a unfocused chapter, but really what we're talking about in all of these is commitment. Right. And all of these different motivations, the commitment that I'm having right now to make my stomach stop growling by having lunch as soon as I get done with this, um, I'm committing to that behavior. Like nothing is going to deter me from that behavior. Right. So no matter what we're talking about, whether it's, motivations or, an achievement and work or marriage, these are things that are all supported by our ability to make a commitment and stick to a chosen path and so on. So I hope that all makes sense to you, and I will see you in the next chapter.